Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Grand Rising Experience. And in today's episode, I want to share with you how I started to learn how to use my physical body to decode my emotional story. So this story starts in 2017, and it was a time in my life where I was incredibly stressed out, and I was taking on far too much at work. I was in a job that was incredibly demanding. At that time, I think I was working anywhere from 80 to 100 hours a week. And the time zones in which I worked spanned San Francisco to Hong Kong. So there was this expectation that I would be going 24/7. And it was through this period in my life that my body literally started to shut down. And I had to start learning some really hard truths about myself in this process, and exactly how my body was showing the signs of distress long before my logical mind could even begin to comprehend what was happening. And it took me a few years to start to realize that this had already happened to me in 2015 during a very routine dental surgery. I had my wisdom teeth taken out, and I ended up with such an incredibly horrendous infection that I was hospitalized for almost 3 weeks. It was shortly after leaving the hospital that my spiritual awakening and journey began, but I hadn't realized it yet. It took this episode in 2017 for me to really start being able to connect the dots. Throughout my life, I had been so disconnected from my body. So as I was saying, for the majority of my life, I was completely disconnected from my body. And when it was in distress and screaming at me, it just became second nature to dissociate and tune it out. And I had so many doctors just flabbergasted at my threshold for pain. And I always refused to take painkillers because I hated the way they made me feel. So I would just soldier through. And looking back, I now have so much compassion for the girl and the woman who was actually in survival mode and just doing the best that she could with what she had. But now that I know better, I have vowed to never self-harm like that again. So jumping back to 2017, I had chronic back pain for years. And during this time where I was descending into burnout but hadn't quite figured it out yet, I vividly remember crawling to the bathroom at 5:30 in the morning, needing to get ready for work. And I had no idea how I was going to get to the office, how I was going to spend the next 14 to 16 hours at my desk. And I didn't even know how I was going to stand up. But there was this psychological and mental story that I was replaying in my head that told me, like, I needed to get to work. And unfortunately, as is very common in these types of corporate settings, I had an unruly manager who would just say, if you're sick, just log in from home, not rest, not get better, or your health is more important than a job because we're not saving lives. We operated on this push through the pain mentality, and she led by example. So again, I have to sit back and look at this and have compassion for her as well, because there was this lack of awareness and disconnection that caused her to do the exact same thing. And because I showed up regardless of what was happening, my dedication to pushing through at all costs made me the shining example of a dedicated employee, which is absolutely terrifying. And it's important, again, for me to clarify that my job didn't require me to save lives. I was managing and streamlining processes so that multi-billion-dollar corporations could buy, sell, and track their companies more efficiently. And I can't begin to tell you how many times over the course of a year I crawled on my hands and knees before the sun was even up to be able to get ready for work. And I just accepted this pain as normal and permanent until I finally quit my job and completely burned out, and then everything changed. And I think it's important to point out that it wasn't the physical pain that I was experiencing throughout my body that triggered my desire to quit and the speed in which I did it. It was actually, I was on vacation in Ottawa at a music festival, and I was walking around the Rideau Canal, and my phone would not stop ringing. I could not get any reprieve or respite. And I thought at one point that I had missed a client meeting. And it sent me into a panic attack that was so severe. I actually thought I might have to call 911 because I thought I might have been having a heart attack. So after I left, I was a fucking mess. And I barely left the house for probably the next 4 to 5 months. And it was during that time that I started developing this spiritual toolkit, wellness toolkit. And it started because I wanted to learn how to meditate, because you're taught that meditation is how you clear your mind, which is a fallacy, and I'll talk about that more later. But as I started to meditate, I would find myself Googling, what's a chakra? And then I had my first aha moment related to this back pain that I've had for my entire life. And it was this epiphany that made me realize that this back pain could be related to my root chakra. And was it possible that my former job was a symptom of how out of alignment I was with my soul, that it was literally crippling me? And then I just had to know more. So at that time, I booked my first ever session with an energy facilitator who happened to be trained in Reiki. And without knowing anything about me, her immediate response to my energy was that my root chakra was a mess, and it was deeply connected to my childhood and my ancestors. So just for those who may not know, your root chakra biologically governs the lower part of your body, including the bladder, the kidneys, the lower spine, and the back. It's located around the base of your tailbone. And psychologically, it governs your primary needs, which include fight or flight, safety, and security. And because your nervous system runs through your entire spinal column, the beliefs that rule your root chakra are deeply subconscious and, as I've learned, often inherited. And just to take a pause, if we want to think over the last 3 years collectively and what's been happening and how uprooted everyone has become under the pandemic, the root chakra, the center of your fight or flight and safety and security, is something that I believe a lot of people need to pay particular attention to and really work to be aware of how it is affecting your physical health, your emotional health, your mental health, and to begin to cultivate a relationship with that particular chakra. Because I do know that in my experience, it became a transformational launch point for me to start learning how to heal myself. So my Reiki healer, she worked on loosening the blocks in my body and then started giving me tips to find balance. So foods to eat or frequencies to listen to, yoga poses, meditations, chants. And this was in 2017, early 2018. And I've not had a single issue with my lower back since. And this woman not only shifted my pain, but more importantly, and I would say most important, she provided me with an experience and the tools that brought the awareness and insight needed to connect my emotional pain to my physical pain in my body. And it was like being handed this roadmap to my being for the very first time, and meeting her fundamentally changed my life. So as I started kind of going down this road of self-healing and learning how to, through trial and error, use my body as a roadmap to improve my emotional and mental and physical health, I stumbled upon the concept of intuitive development. And I think it may have been on Instagram. Something popped up in my algorithm and it was an ad for these intuitive development classes. So I signed up and it ended up being the biggest gift I ever gave myself. So every 2 weeks, I found myself traveling to the plateau in Montreal to this little tea shop that was rented out after hours. And I would sit with a small group of aware and awake and compassionate women. I think there were maybe at most 10 of us. And for 2 hours, we would practice how to get still and tap into the body. And it was through this practice that I started to learn how to tell the difference between my energy and the energy that I was absorbing for others. And then it taught me how to also start to let my guard down and be vulnerable and hold space for others to do the same. And this was happening through learning how to meditate more deeply. We would practice something called psychometry, and essentially everyone would bring an item and we'd put it into a box and you would just reach in blindly and grab something and you would have to sit there and meditate, and whatever came up, it could be a sensation, it could be a feeling, it could be a thought, it could be a vision, whatever came up, you would write down. And this is also how I started to learn that meditation isn't what I thought it was, which was that you sit really still, very quiet, that you don't move, that you don't break the meditative experience. Because through this entire experience, you would often have to open your eyes, pick up a pen, write it down. And it just taught me that meditation can be a different state of being where there is still awareness and that you're not completely closed off to the environment that you're in. So that happened to be a very powerful reframe and shift for me in terms of how I experience a meditative state. But the most unexpected and important takeaway from sitting around this table was an awareness of how my body tenses, aches, and trembles before my brain has a chance to process an emotion. And once this started to happen, I was able to start connecting reactions in my body to past situations, events, and experiences. I could see the pattern in my life over time when my body would feel the same way and start mapping back through the experiences in which it happened. And this is how I started decoding the physical manifestations of the emotional debris that I was hoarding from my past and absorbing from everyone around me. And this is how I learned how to get in front of panic attacks and control the residual anxiety that I was still feeling. I was getting really curious about what I inherited versus what I actually experienced and how one profoundly influences the other. And this led me down a rabbit hole of epigenetics, and it brought me to the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton and Mark Wolin, and really starting to look at how my RNA has influenced my DNA. And essentially, this is how I started to learn the story of me. And I feel like it's such a powerful and profoundly impactful experience to really learn how to sit inside of your body, or to not numb or dissociate or bypass what we're feeling, and instead to find the power inside of that physical pain and transform it into profound wells of healing that ripple out to everyone around you. Through this understanding and understanding and knowing that I have through my own personal experiences, that has led me to want to help others cultivate the courage and confidence to do the same. So this is why I have the Grand Rising experience, and this is why I have the Cocoon, which is my private members community, to be able to, for now at least on a digital level, be able to provide people with similar experiences like I had sitting around that table at the tea room in Montreal, and in an environment that only wants to support the healing that you are fully capable of experiencing within yourself. So if this sounds like something you may be interested in experiencing, highly recommend that you jump over to grandrisingexperience.substack.com and look for the cocoon. It's in the top menu. You can click on it, read a little bit about what I'm hoping to provide in that space and what I'm looking to cultivate with a group of like-minded men and women. And in the meantime, I would love to hear from you and hear a little bit more about your own journey, to hear if you have had similar experiences where you've been able to start connecting your physical pain to your emotional pain, or perhaps you had an aha moment during this conversation and have been able to make some of the connections between something you might be feeling physically to an emotional blockage that you might have. I want to know all of the things. So please, again, drop a comment or send me an email. You can send me an email at support@grandrising.live. I believe this work has the ability to change the world. We have to take care of ourselves first. Healing is an inside-out job. Thank you again for tuning in. If you found value in this episode, please like, share, subscribe. And until next time, I love you.